Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge podcast. Today we're talking all about posture. We're going to get into the nitty gritty of what exactly is posture, what makes for good posture and bad posture, and also the things that affect your posture. So this will also inform how you can change or improve your posture should you want or need to do that. But before we get into it, as always, a quick thank you to our show sponsors, thetrainingstimulus.com. Please check it out if you're interested in learning more about movement mechanics. Wit Fitness, wit-fitness.com. Please use our discount code LL15 to get 15% all your Wit kit. And Hydro, use discount code LL20 to get 20% off your blood flow restriction apparel. Right, let's get into it. Rob, posture.
Yes, posture. I mean, what's a good posture? I think that's probably the hot question on most people's lips. What is a good posture? Because I think we're told that the classic, kyphotic, shoulders pulled forward, head down, neck forward, all from the texting, the typing, the small laptop, especially with COVID, everyone being at their probably dinner tables and really poor desk setups. And then they were like, it's only temporary. And 2 years later, and it's still kind of at their kitchen table. It's like, yeah, body's taking an absolute beating, not walking as much. So again, they're sitting so much more. So all of, I guess, these like day-to-day nuances are really going to impact the body in a relatively negative way, and especially when most of those people that say that we deal with still want to try and keep up with their training. So they actually move a lot less. So their day-to-day standing has become even less than what it was. And then when their training starts to suffer. So, and I think posture is one of those ones where we probably don't even think about. Well, I know obviously yourself and myself do, but generally, is your posture actually a problem? And is that actually impacting you for everything else you're trying to do? So I think it'd be quite good to maybe start off with what is posture itself.
Yeah, I think it's something that people don't think about enough, really, in that what actually constitutes posture. And I think the way I think about it is your posture is like the rolling average of the position that you spend most of your time in. So your body is evolved to save energy and be as efficient as it can in the way that it moves. So if you're repeatedly telling your body to be in a certain shape or a certain position, it's going to hold you there by default to save you energy. So in all those examples you described, like if you're texting or typing or hunched over a laptop, you're sending a signal to your brain and your body to say, this is where I spend most of my time. So if we just tighten up the muscles that hold me in this position, I don't need to actively contract and relax these muscles so much. So I save energy. So it's actually your body trying to help you do the things that you're telling it you want to do. And where this becomes a hindrance is that when you're asking very conflicting things of your body. So you're saying, I want to be hunched over a laptop for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, but I also want to snatch 100 kilos, or I sort of want to do kipping pull-ups and get into big extended positions. And now there's an argument happening in your body that says, hang on a minute, you told me that you want to be like this most of the time, but now you're telling me you want to do almost the exact opposite. So I think in terms of how it works and what it is, those are the fundamentals. But I think one common misconception is that people think it's just your spine, in that if you have a rounded back, that's your posture.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, as we know, the body is a team and it all works together. So everything affects everything else. So if your feet are dysfunctional, your hips aren't working very well, your pelvis is off kilter, all of those things will play into what you see as the net result of your posture, which might be rounded or hyperextended in the spine. But the root cause of that could be somewhere else. And we need to consider the full picture before evaluating what's good posture and what might be causing your current posture.
Yeah, I guess what's important is, when we talk about in like how with fitness, it should be a lifestyle, because
Mm-hmm.
even if you work, say, a law firm or like in the trading world or whatever, like all like you're prone to be at a desk a lot more. And so you're going to be sitting, you're going to be probably messaging people. You're already doing this for most of your day. Like I have a couple of, well, most of my clients are all like that. So it's like you have to find ways that in your lifestyle that you break the norm so that you're
Mm.
not just sitting down all day. And this is where I like to tell people, like, if you're doing meetings that aren't video calls, walking around while you're doing a meeting, so you're standing, or you get a stand-up desk where you can go from seating to standing. So you have those options, because if it is the rolling average, you can't expect your body to be able to perform standing up when you're training than when you're then sitting down for most of your day. If you're sitting down for 12 hours and potentially asleep for probably, by those type of people, maybe 6 to 7 hours, you've got this hour, one hour to train. Your body's gonna be like, no, I don't need to adapt to that. So
Exactly,
it's
yeah.
one of those things that we then try and do all this like mobility and stuff like that just to do this 1 hour of training. So then it takes you about 20 minutes just to be able to move for 40 minutes. And you're like, what? So it really does start to ask these questions, and it needs to be part of your lifestyle. And to understand what is good posture, well, I guess that starts to make, how do you feel day to day? And what, if you look to yourself in the mirror, what do you look like? Like, what's the shape of your body, and what is that shape telling you? If it's telling you something that it's not ideal, that you're okay, you can barely see your chest because your shoulders are hiding it off, and your neck is craned so far forward. You got to look at this and say, this doesn't look good. I'm not talking aesthetically, but because even though that doesn't look good, but just stand to the side and look at yourself like, take a video. Like, you need to make a change. And it's like, I think what would be good is to maybe understand then, what are some of these classic positions? So we've spoken about there with the shoulders forward, that neck craning forward. So that's called kyphosis, right? So you have a kyphotic posture.
Yeah. So rounded back, upper back, classic kyphosis, like shoulders slumped forwards. And I liked what you said there about what's your posture telling you. Because it's the rolling average, it's saying that you're spending more time in those positions, and that is the adaptation you're asking of your body. And that it's almost like a calculation of how to work out your rolling averages. 12 hours a day, you're sending this message. 1 hour of a day, you're sending that message. That still isn't enough to move the average to where you want it to be. So either you've got to be so extreme in that 1 hour trying to get into really ridiculous counter postures, or you need to adjust the 12 hours and break it up, which we'll talk about later, how you might actually do that to change the average position overall. So it's a war, it's not a battle, it's not something you can fix in one day.
No.
You need to upgrade the average towards where you want to be, like, consistently.
It's something I've always been grateful for, that the career that we've kind of chosen. And I think, even through COVID, how things kind of changed. But like, I've been so grateful for standing. Like, my job, I will stand for a minimum of, say, 5 hours a day. Like, minimum. So, you're standing with clients, and you're not just standing still, you're moving, you're squatting, you're doing. So I actively put my body through positions where I don't do the quote unquote mobility work, that I have a good positional squat and I have all these good positions. That's because I demo things, I show these things, I'm constantly moving my body. So it's like, I'm extremely grateful for that. And I understand that then if your job doesn't dictate that, like as through COVID, we've had a lot more through screens, through sitting, through programming online, so a lot less of that in person, and kind of coming back out of it now. But it then meant, did you feel that affecting your body?
Yeah, massively.
It's huge, right? So it's just those sort of things. It just means we have to actively put ourselves back into these standing positions and standing up.
Yeah, totally. Like, we've got to just manage that average. And like you say, the ultimate truth is, what posture do you naturally hold yourself in? Have a look side on. That's the truth. You can't argue with where your body is showing you it likes to be on average.
Quickly,
and
just on that, because I think, as I said about looking sideways, and it's what makes me laugh as well, because I then think to something completely obscure and look at people's body transformations and notice how their posture changes so much as well, from being fat and overweight, say, shoulders, everything's like this, and then they suddenly in this better shape, taller, happier, better, shoulders pulled back because they're training, they're doing more, they're more active in their lifestyle. And just funny how that, yes, okay, they've lost body fat and stuff like that, but their whole postures, their whole demeanor's changed. How you carry yourself day to day has changed. And this is why posture is more than just the way you are. It is your demeanor, the energy that you exhume and stuff like that. Because that confidence, that's classic, standing tall, feeling confident, is because you are feeling on top of the world. And when you're all kyphotic and all like this, it's not great. So
it's an interesting sort of tangent, the emotional component of posture, which is a whole other topic, which I think we'll save for another time. But the other classic one, just to cover that one off, is the Lordotik posture. So basically, think of this as an overextended or arched lower back,
big bum.
and yeah, exactly, bum stuck out. And the commonality between all postural adaptations is that they're trying to keep your eyes level. So it's really important for our brain to have our eyes level so that we can accurately perceive the environment around us and our position in space. So your spine is going to do whatever it can to ensure that happens. And the way I like to think about this one is that imagine your pelvis is a table from which your spine would be like a stack of Coke cans. If that table isn't flat in any direction, those Coke cans have got to tilt so that you balance another like horizontal object on top of it, which would be your head and your eyes. So if your pelvis is tilted forwards or back, the spine is going to have to counter curve to that to maintain the flat surface at the top being your eyes. And whether you're kyphotic or lordotic, that's always going to be true. Even side bending and scoliosis, where you've got a slight sideways or rotational twist to your spine, the same thing is happening. You're just trying to keep your eyes pointing in the direction that you want to go or you want to look, so that it's easy for you to orientate yourself in space.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, these sort of positional changes can be changed. Like sometimes there are things that kind of sort people out and like they lock them into positions and they seem to never be able to get out of it. Like I've had clients over the years that they've had scoliosis and they've just had to train around it, but they were say born with scoliosis or they were born with these like deformed, say, spines. So then sometimes their body has then grown and adapted and then they've had to do everything based on their life. But just like you said there, with that head kind of always staying neutral, then that's how their body has changed. Then over the years, where they then introduce training, it does then mean they have to take certain considerations into training and they can't just necessarily do a load of barbell work because then the stresses, even though they've built up strength in their body, is going to be massively uneven, so they'll then put extra stresses into places. Have you dealt with clients with scoliosis?
Yeah, so scoliosis is varies in degree. I think like a long time ago, and probably still today, there are some extreme cases where they'll literally fuse your spine straight. So
Oh,
they'll
really?
attach metal to straighten out your spine if it's super curved. However, most scoliosis is like what would be classed as scoliosis is a postural adaptation. So something's going on elsewhere in the body and the spine is just side bending or rotating to balance it out. So it is changeable in the same way that a kyphosis or a lordosis is changeable. We just need the right inputs into the body to remove the need for that scoliosis to keep the eyes level. But it is definitely something of varying degrees of severity where I think it would classically get diagnosed as an unchangeable condition when actually it's more influenceable than most people might suggest.
Oh, really?
So yeah, it's a really interesting thing because most people have a small degree of scoliosis just
Yeah.
by nature of being one-sided.
Yeah.
So if you're always leaning on one side to use a mouse or write or whatever it is, your body will naturally hold you towards that side because it saves energy. But how much it does that is the thing that changes. And if it's obviously very severe, then it does limit your options, as we're going to talk about later, because it changes the amount of motion you have in each direction.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Just because I remember that my client that I had way back in the day, like this is quite my early days of PT, which I wish I had them now and kind of had gone through because from how much more that I know now than I did back then. But and I remember like I can't remember the full details, but I do remember that she had surgery. There was she had quite a severe scoliosis, and that was. But she was told by the physio at the time, okay, you can't do certain things, and that then come down to me, like with a physio note, right? This person can't do X, Y, Z. So I'm like, cool. So then basically that's how I trained her. But now knowing that and like speaking to people like Franco, obviously seeing from all of his experiences, from what I've learned from you and all the movement mechanics stuff there, I would definitely probably counter maybe some of those statements and probably make the change. And yeah, so I didn't really realize that.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that the old approaches and advice have been updated or should have been updated. And if there's surgery, then I can't speak to that specific
Yeah,
case, obviously. But I think a lot of people that would get diagnosed as having scoliosis can do something about it, and it's not necessarily a problem. Like, you can still train, you can still lift.
Yeah.
If it's a mild scoliosis, then there's just some extra considerations you want in terms of how you move your spine, and potentially look to unbend it in whatever way it's predisposed to.
So I guess that kind of leads on to what is good posture, because we're talking about kyphosis, lordosis, scoliosis. What's the good osis that we want to be in?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. And posture, if we go back to the definition, it's the average. So it's just your default where you gravitate back towards. It's not where you can go to. That doesn't get considered. And ultimately, good posture allows you to do the things you want to do pain-free and performing at the level you want to perform. There's also this concept of neutral. So you're having a neutral spine, but we don't want to only be in neutral. We don't want to only be aligned. We want the options to move in the directions we want to move, in the range of motion we want to move. So in a perfect world, we would gravitate towards neutral, and that would be our default. So we're in the middle of our range of motion in all 6 directions. So there's 3 planes of motion: forward, back, left, right, and rotating left, rotating right. We want to be in the middle of all those directions so that we have maximum opportunity to move in those 6 directions, which means that whatever we want to do in life, we have the greatest chance of being able to do it. And if we tend towards one of those 6 directions, it can actually shut down range in both directions in that plane of motion. So say you are naturally flexed, you're obviously closer to your end range flexion. You can't forward fold as much because you're starting halfway there already, but it'll also limit your extension. And Gary Ward, one of my teachers, talks about this really nicely, the concept of your perceived center. So if you're slightly flexed, your body thinks that's the middle of its range. So however far forwards it will go into flexion, it will only ever really go the same amount back. So you're missing the end ranges of your extension. So you actually cut your range down in both directions rather than just the one. So what we want to do to move towards good posture is align your perceived center more closely with your actual center, like the actual middle of your joints range of motion. So we'll talk about exactly how we do that later on. But the other thing I want to say about good posture is digging into that part about letting you do what you want to do with your body. And this is where we might stray away from the classic neutral spine being good posture for an individual, in that if you have a specific job or sport that you're training for or competing in, then a specific posture might help you perform better at that sport, which might be bad for the rest of life. And the classic example here is cycling. The aero position, being really hunched over, tucked in, so you can create a nice slipstream and minimize your drag, will mean you cycle faster and save energy and perform better in that sport. But when you're off the bike, then it's not the best shape to be in for lots of other tasks. Like if you want to press overhead or you want to stand up straight, it's conflicting with that use of the body. And other ones to think of might be barbell sports. If you're a weightlifter, being very extended helps you pull the bar close. And rowing in a boat is the other classic example, where if you row on one side of the boat, you're going to side bend and rotate more one way than you are the other. And the point I want to make here is that there is a trade-off against day-to-day function here, in that if you're highly competitive at your sport, adapting your posture towards the demands of that sport can negatively impact your performance outside of the sport. So the things you can do outside the gym or competition. And there is a competitive trade-off here, in that somebody who's less bothered about their posture out of sport can train more in the sport. So if you're a cyclist and you're trying to maintain a nice, tall, upright posture, so you're spending some of your training time and energy working on extension, being nice and tall, aligning that spine, your competitor might be spending that same amount of time just grinding away on the bike, getting fitter. So you're at a competitive disadvantage if you're more bothered about your posture than somebody who's willing to take back pain and discomfort outside of the sport. So it's just something I wanted to raise, in that if you are that competitive athlete, pursuing perfect posture can be a bit of a distraction versus getting good at your sport.
Yeah, and I guess that's the question: are you doing this professionally, or do you really want to be the best that you can possibly be, or is it you're willing to take maybe some gains that you're not going to get by having a better outside of that sport life? Because like for me, it's just like I know Jake, like while I was doing cycling, like the how much stress on say the lower back and like on just the shoulders being pulled out, because I naturally didn't go to that kyphotic shoulders pulled forward state because I just wasn't built for that, and because I haven't trained in that position for long enough to be good in that position. So whenever I was trying to get myself into that position, like the stress across my like shoulders and upper back, just because it didn't want to go there. And it's like when I then ask myself those questions, like, is it worth it? They're the ones that you always, that's what you determine, is that's your answer. Because when we talk about good posture, like if you want to be really good at a certain sport and your sport asks for you to be in this compromised posture, then cool, that's fine. Then maybe for those 5-10 years of your sport you're doing that, you just know you're going to have to take about 5-10 or more years to get yourself back to neutral then once you finish your sport. But that is potentially a sacrifice you're willing to make because you're looking to be the best. And this is why when we talk about, say, like CrossFitters, when they have a weakness, they still don't do everything. And they go through them periods and say, right, I'm going to focus on building my strength and maybe just tick away, doing the basics, doing some like fundamentals of some conditioning and some stuff just to tick that over, but have a heavy focus maybe on the strength training because I need to build up my strength, or vice versa. I really need to work on some of the long aerobic pieces. So I'm going to do more of that. So your body can then adapt to the task at hand. So it's funny because I find CrossFit is a really interesting one to then always think about with the posture, because they have to be good at so many different things. So what is the perfect posture for a CrossFitter? Because I would say it's neutral, because you need to be able to access then all of those 6 directions at any cost. So really everything should always be there. And it then means you probably won't be great at weightlifting, you won't be great at that, but that is what a CrossFitter is. They're kind of good at everything.
Yeah, well, it goes back to your original statement at the start of your body is telling you what your rolling average is. So if you look at people who do loads of CrossFit, where do their spines tend to be? Because they're doing the stuff that is affecting their posture day in, day out, and they're responding to the demands of the sport. So what you tend to see is quite upright, but quite stiff, like because the demands of the sport involve a lot of barbell, a lot of bracing against heavy loads. It is adaptive for CrossFitters' spines to be stiff so that they don't change shape under load. And what that usually means is a compromised ability to side bend and rotate, because there isn't so much of that in the sport. So they're generally quite good at flexion extension because kipping on the bar or on the rings, you need to flex and extend. But the stiffness is an adaptation away from this is less posture, more sort of spine movement options in a normal person. Let's say, not saying that CrossFitters are all not normal, but in day-to-day life, you would want more movement in the spine to give access to positions like picking up a pen from the side on the floor rather than just straight in front of you. So yeah, the biggest clue is just what do athletes from that sport tend to look like. And CrossFitters tend to be nice and upright, but stiff. And they generally have one plane of motion that just completely shuts down to provide that stiffness.
So I guess that leads on to also what affects our posture. We've spoken about it, kind of, we've touched on it now, like with the time in position. I think that's probably the biggest indicator of what affects posture. But maybe what else is there?
Yeah. So time in position would probably be factor number 1 for me, because you're just consistently sending that signal to your body. This is where I want to be. Hold me here, and don't waste excess energy by taking me away from the shape. Let's gravitate back to it. Classic, like back to the bike. You're going for long 4, 6, maybe 8 hours of riding on a Sunday. That's a really strong signal to say, this is where I want to be, so hold me here. The other component to that is the stress in the position. So even if you're not there for huge amounts of time, if you're doing a lot of work and bracing and lifting heavy weights in a certain shape, then you're telling your body this is something that I need to reinforce. So holding me here with strong, like with a great deal of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like tension and like locking me into this position. So lifting the barbell here, if you're a weightlifter and you're constantly in that nice extended position, nice and upright, so you can jump and pull with the bar close to you, then that's a really strong signal to your body that being extended through the spine is somewhere that you should be and should adapt towards, even if it's not for as long as endurance cycling, for example. However, the third one, which in my mind keeps your options open, would be the other positions that you regularly access. So where we get hyper specialized towards a certain position, so the cycling or the typing on the keyboard, if we're constantly reminding our body that we need to do other things, then that is like a business case to say we can't go too far. We're shifting the balance back. We're adjusting that average towards more neutral. So if we're accessing end range extension as well as end range flexion, if we're accessing left side bend as well as right side bend, we're constantly refreshing the nervous system's needs to own those positions and maintain access to them. It's when we don't use a position that it starts to get lost. And the analogy I love here is the door that's constantly in use, its hinge never develops rust, whereas the door that's always open or closed, those are the hinges that can get rusty. So you can think of your joints and your spine in exactly the same way. If they're constantly in motion, then they're much less likely to stiffen up in one certain position, which can be good or bad, right? If you want that stiffness, then you don't want to be doing loads of mobility work on your spine if you're a weightlifter or if you're a power lifter, because that stiffness does help you perform your sport, but like we said earlier, has a bit of a trade-off against options outside of the sport or outside of the gym. So those would be the key three things: time and position.
Time, stress, and then the other positions access. And I think those other position access, they're like the mini wins, aren't they? Because it's like where I said earlier, where I talk to my clients and say, do your meetings standing up, do your walking, and I think it's a really easy thing to think about, because if you imagine people, you've been on a flight, you're sitting down for and you try and stand up, how creaky, and it's just how good it feels to stand, or like you've been sitting all day, like, or even just doing the opposite from standing all day to sitting. Like how good that is. So I remember when I first got my stand-up desk, and I was like, right, I did a whole day's programming standing up, and my heels and feet were in pieces. I sat down in today, just like, I can't stand back up. I got to sit, because I did an extreme. Even though I'm used to standing up for periods of time, I was standing up and then say on the computer typing and just in that position for so long. And I didn't sit down. I was like, this is good for me. And fuck, how bad the body felt afterwards was ridiculous. But it's the extremes, and I think we've all experienced that, where you get out of a position and you are creaky. You're like, oh, that's been a while, a little stretch. Oh, okay, now I'm all right. Now you'll grease the groove, get back into it, and feel good again. So
literally that, like literally your joints secrete synovial fluids, which literally lubricates the joints through motion. So lube up those joints, but it doesn't get secreted unless the joints move. So that's why your joints will literally dry out and feel rusty if you don't move them for a while. And cool sort of side note is that even happens after you're dead. Like if you flex and extend a dead animal's, I've not done this with a human, unfortunately, but with a dead animal's joint, the joint will literally continue to lubricate. For
that's cool.
a long period of time.
Because I was going to say, how does a dead things? How do they do that movement? But if you're doing it for them,
they're not possessed.
So I guess something which will be quite key for our listeners and is to understand how to actively change your posture. So for me as well, understanding what posture is going to be best for you. Like, do you need this neutral posture, or do you need a more specialized posture? So that would, I guess, be one of the first questions you ask yourself.
Exactly. Do you need to do it in the first place? If not, then you don't need to change anything. But if you are trying to actively change your posture, I think everyone, when they're a moody teenager, their parents are probably like shoulders down and back, stand up straight, whatever. But that conscious contraction or conscious correction to try and hold yourself in that position, everyone knows it doesn't last very long. Like as soon as you switch off mentally, then you're going to fall back to your default, because that's what feels like it's exerting the least energy, and your body's always trying to save energy. So the other thing about the conscious contractions is that you're training stiffness, you're training like hard work, and you're essentially starting a tug of war between muscles on each side of the body. So you're saying muscles on the back of my body need to fight harder to win this tug of war against the muscles on the front of my body, putting myself forwards. And that isn't a sustainable strategy to hold you in a good posture all day, every day for the rest of your life. So what you actually want to do is change that perceived center, give your body an experience of where might be better. So this is where that other positions access point is really important, changing the average by going into the more extreme positions in the direction you want the change. So if you're always flexed, exploring extended positions and getting your body to feel the benefits of being there, say, oh, hang on a minute, things actually work better here. I can turn my neck more, I can rotate more, I can use my shoulders better. And your subconscious will start to imprint that as actually a better place to be, because it gives you more options and lets you do the things that you want to do. The other thing that I would advise for changing your posture is, rather than having those hard, conscious, concentric contractions, use the eccentric more. So if you are flexed, it sounds counterintuitive, but actually driving yourself into more flexion and bringing about a stretch reflex to get those muscles longer will actually give them the opportunity to then shorten. Whereas if they're just fixed in length the whole time, where you're trying to pull them really like with that conscious concentric contraction, it is that tug of war rather than just motion and giving a fluid flowing experience. So yeah, I don't want to go over that one again, but basically if you are classically flexed, getting into like a Jefferson curl, forward folding to lengthen the muscles on the back of your body before then going into extension actually helps those muscles work far more effectively than just pulling yourself back into extension and trying to fight your way there.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice way of thinking about it as well, because generally where we do pull back and you have that classic, right, the shoulders back and down, lock yourself down into position, and like you mentioned there, it's very hard to then keep yourself there because it's not a natural position for being. So to take yourself through ranges of motion that, you know, are exploring them, you know, like going into different positions, and it's, if you're not
using them,
like for those type of positions, they do make you feel good. Like, you know, when, and I think everyone could understand with this position, but when you're yawning and you're stretching, you open up into extension, you open up the body, because naturally we're forward. So you yawn, you open into extension, and then come back to flexion. And finding that, so actually going into that extreme version of that lengthening of all those back muscles, going into that Jefferson's curl, trying to say touch your toes, and then work your way back up and going into the other way. All you're doing is saying to your body, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this position. So you're going down through it all. So your body's like, shit, I do actually need that one still, don't I? So it remembers it, and it has to then go back to it, and it won't get there easily. That is the thing, you know. Like one of my clients come to me, like when they first come to me, said, one of my goals is to touch my toes. I was like, okay, why? He goes, because it's just good. What you're supposed to be able to do. I said, okay, try and touch your toes. So they tried to touch their toes, and I said, okay, actually do it like this. So I showed them how to touch their toes, and they didn't get to their toes, but they got so much lower. I said, you just didn't understand how to get to your toes in the first place. People they bend from where they think they need to bend to touch their toes, but that's where they're blocked and where they feel comfortable. I showed them kind of how to hinge and then flex the spine, and they was like, oh shit, I could actually get lower down. But it's just because, again, they didn't understand the position of using their hips and then using their spines kind of like independently rather than just flexing from the spine. And because that's all they knew. They were quite kyphotic and just a bit older, so their whole life has basically been getting in that position. So
well, that's exactly right. They haven't used it, and it is very much use it or lose it. And one example I like to give for like overhead position and spinal extensions, if you want to get good at thoracic extension and shoulder flexion, like basically reaching overhead, just do a really detailed painting on the ceiling. Like if you're using that position, spending lots of time in that position, creating stress in that position because it's going to be hard work to be there.
Burns,
But
makes
also,
sense.
yeah, but also using a lot of coordination and developing skill in that position. It's a really strong business case to your nervous system that holding your bones in that orientation is important to you. So you'll very quickly adapt to that. It'll be quite stressful, and it's obviously an extreme example, but you maintain the positions that you frequently use. If you're not using them, then your nervous system will just think, well, this isn't of use to me. There's no point spending energy and resources and structural tissues to allow me to be there because you're telling me that I don't need it. So I'll just spend my energy elsewhere, which in more important things like typing on the keyboard, for example.
Yeah, I think it's also like carries over to everything that we do when it comes to like adapting to what the stresses are in front of us. Like when you get
Yeah.
people doing like trade work, even for like myself. So when I'm doing a lot of DIY stuff, so I'd say get into the garden and start digging up a load of stuff, my body gets beaten up very quickly. Whereas I know, so someone that is a gardener and they do a lot of landscape, they do that, they'll be completely fine. Their body's used to the varying positions, lifting, carrying, and doing it. It's like, yes, I can do it, but because I expose my body to certain positions, but the longevity of that, my body can't handle it. But over time, it will because it adapts. Because my body and my posture will all adapt to whatever the task at hand. And it's so easy to just get caught up in the task at hand. Like when it comes to people at work, like on their computer, and everyone knows they've been typing away, they look up and it's like 3 hours later and they're like, fuck, I haven't even had a sip of water. Like I've not even moved. And it's like, because you get zoned in, which is completely normal, which is where then maybe add in an alarm on your phone or just something, some type of trigger to change your state. People didn't talk about obviously deep work, and you want to be in deep work, and I get that, where you are so focused and you can get some real high quality stuff. But there's obviously a lot of arguments to how much quality is it. Say 3 hours in, is it still that high quality? And maybe actually you changing your state and coming back to it, you'll be performing better. But I do understand kind of coming back to things, it is a bit tricky at times. But for health,
Yeah, but even if it's changing, like you said, between sitting and standing, as long as
Yeah.
you're getting that movement in, and if you're standing, it's not too much work to go into a big stretch, a big yawn, a bit of a twist, a bit of a side bend. You're just adding in that little refresher that your body needs to move in all 6 directions, all joints, not just the spine, getting some motion into the body. And if that's at regular intervals and it breaks up those long periods, I don't think you need to fully come out of your deep work. You can hopefully build it in to not be an onerous burden that adds more to your to-do list.
Yeah, so I guess a couple of special considerations will be that I guess your spine is pretty sensitive, and we touched on this in our back pain episode. You must always proceed with caution, but making sure you're doing things like Jeffersons or side bends and rotations, these type of movements that you don't necessarily normally do, but make sure you're still doing them under control. You always want to have control through a movement, because as soon as you go into an uncontrolled state, that's where the risk of injury starts to come in, and the risk becomes a lot higher. So maybe going too heavy on a Jefferson curl, maybe beyond body weight, you start lifting weights that you're not accustomed to. Or maybe, even doing like a classic side bend, like you see in the gym with people with the weights and they're doing their side bends. But again, if you never laterally move, that could fuck you up. So it's something you have to be conscious of. But you do want to expose yourself to these positions so that you don't lose that ownership.
Yeah, spot on. I think the classic overcompensation for bad posture is to hammer it and try to aggressively change your spinal shapes. And small movements can be just as effective. You're trying to encourage range, you're trying to encourage positions rather than force them. And just because you've got a big deadlift, it doesn't mean that you're going to be super strong in a Jefferson curl or, like you say, a loaded side bend, because that system shock and that sudden stress to the body is what it doesn't like. And because the spine's sensitive, that's a great recipe for triggering like a back spasm, because your spine will be like, hang on a minute, I don't feel safe here. I'm just going to shut down motion here. And we're going to wait for another day. So slowly encouraging motion in those positions. You don't need a huge amount of weight for these unusual shapes, but just teasing and encouraging range gradually over time is definitely the approach you should take for that.
And I think obviously, like as I mentioned earlier, like breaking up those long chunks, being stuck in the same position, and telling yourself, look, you need to change, you need to move into these positions, you need this position, because you'll just feel better. Like you just generally feel better about your day. Like no matter who you are, if you're stuck in a position, as I mentioned earlier about being on a plane, you sit on a plane for a while. Everyone always, when you stand, like you get this like across the plane, when they stand up and they can stretch or they have to walk up and down the aisle on long haul flights and stuff, because it's not natural to want to be in these really tight off positions for a long period of time. It's just not. So it's where is the big argument. Or if you stand all day, have the opportunity to sit in. Sitting isn't bad. It's just about finding that balance.
Get the joints moving. Remember, lube those joints up, which needs movement. The other thing I was going to recommend in the special considerations was using a flat surface to tell you what neutral is. Obviously, if you have the wall, the floor, or like a PVC pipe behind you, that's going to give you some really clear feedback as to how straight your spine is, or whether you're naturally head forwards in a way. And to reference Gary Ward again, he has some great stuff called cogs, wall cogs, where you're essentially teaching your spine to flex and extend while staying aligned or on axis. So what we're doing here is teaching the spine that it can move without having to lean forwards, lean back, and getting the sequencing of all those vertebrae back to what they naturally like. If you're naturally kyphotic and your head's forwards, it can actually feel like a workout just to get your head back on top of your shoulders, back on top of your hips, which is obviously where we want to be. And probably something we should have talked about earlier, in that if your head is not on top of your shoulders, on top of your hips, on top of your ankles, then you're actually expending a lot of energy because of the extra leverage. Your head is now away from your base of support.
Pulling you forward the whole time.
Exactly. So your muscles are in tension, just stopping your head falling further away. So the more aligned you are, there's a thing called the Alexander technique, which is just all about alignment and achieving that nicely stacked column, which saves you energy if that's where you spend most of your time. And that is a more efficient position to be in. And using those flat surfaces can be a great tool for learning where neutral actually is and what it feels like to develop that experience and time in a more neutral position.
Yeah, I think when you then go from the wall, you then go into a bit more of a freestanding movement, like say a cat camel, because a lot of people actually don't know how to move their spine independently. So having something like the wall to kind of secure yourself to, and then try and move your spine throughout that, like that is a really nice. It's like I haven't actually thought about doing that myself as like a regression to a cat camel. I kind of I use my hand and say like with clients, like, so I'm kind of touching their spine, like trying to get them to understand that feeling. So I'm using my hand as that cue, but say using a wall is a nice way to do it. So that's something that I've taken away from today. So, and I think one of the most important bits that you kind of suggested earlier as well is how if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. Like, if you're not sore or anything like that, or if you are a professional, say cyclist or whatever, and this is what you need to do, and your perfect body position across the norm isn't quite like what it is, but you're supreme at your sport because of the position you're in, then sweet, you do you. As I said, afterwards you can then come out and start working on this, the homeostasis of being in neutral, and you can work on that for all your thing because you've spent all that time in a proper position for you. But I think where problems come quite thick and fast is where someone's starting a new fitness journey and they've gone from being sitting all the time, terrible posture, and then they start training and they just go straight in with maybe the treadmill, and then they start using machines because that's what they feel comfortable doing, and they just don't have any structure behind what they're doing. So a lot of time they could be just like, they're sitting down on a machine, so they're just strengthening this sitting position. That's why you'll find a lot of trainers will very rarely use machines. It'll be a lot more freestanding full body movements, and then have machines for their specific purposes rather than a sole focus. Obviously it goal dependent, but generally for the general public, you can get so much out of just doing standing exercises. Just get so much more bang for your buck.
Yeah, I think that point, it's not a problem until it's a problem, is really important. I think obsessing over and pursuing perfect posture can be a bit of a waste of time for a lot of people. If you're able to do everything you want to do, which is a big if you can do all the movements you want to do and achieve the right positions and shapes that you need for your training or your sport, and you're not in pain, then perfect posture might not be the best use of your time. But if you are limited in your training options, you want to press weight overhead but you can't, you want to do certain movements that you're not able to get into the shapes for, can't snatch, can't jerk, whatever it might be, if you're held back, then it is something you want to look at. And yeah, obviously there's a vanity component as well. If you want to look a certain way, then yeah, obviously you're free to change your posture for that reason as well. But it's not a must unless it is getting in the way of life, causing you pain.
So to sum it up, that's beautiful. Well done, mate. So I guess basically all our listeners can basically just say, you can just keep cracking on and do you. That's basically it, which is kind of a pointless episode. So we hope you... I'm joking. So we hope you pulled some information away from today's episode, because posture is one of those things that I think we don't fully understand, because we have this perception of always being back and down in that tool, but that is the posture that everyone should be in. And like, it doesn't matter too much. Like, only when these issues start to come up, that's when things obviously have to be addressed. But that's where obviously movement assessments and stuff like that really come into their own, because you can start to say, okay, cool, what are you lacking and how can we do something to then give you more of that to make you better at whatever you want to do. So we do hope you enjoyed today's episode. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I learned some bits as well, which is great. So thank you very much, Ash, and thank you very much for the time that you give us every week. We really appreciate it. If you would like to leave us a review or anything like that, you can head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, subscribe to us on YouTube, just search Lunge and Lift, and we would really appreciate that. So thank you very much as always, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.